there they are again, those funny, funny fellows, Stan the skinny one and Ollie the fat one. Riding along through the California landscape in their ever-faithful Model T Ford, they somehow managed, in their years of making movies, to create a special world of their own. A wonderful, wacky world where the most logical kind of behavior always resulted in the wildest kind of confusion. Here, for example, in one of their first pictures together, they play a couple of men from the sheriff's office, legal beagles who have come to repossess an unpaid-for radio from their old arch-enemy, Edgar Kennedy. Now, you might think that was the simplest thing in the world to do. The law on their side, just serve the man a paper and pick up the radio. No, it's only simple in our world.
Hello, and welcome back to the Laurel Hardy Podcast. I'm Patrick Vasey, the author of Laurel Hardy's Silence and the editor of the all-new Laurel Hardy magazine, and this is episode 33. Today we continue our chronological look at the film career of Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy, and our attention turns to February 1929 and the next film in the boys' canon, Bacon Grabbers. Our guest today is a man that you will all, I'm sure, be very familiar with by now. It's Laurel Hardy expert, film historian and author, friend of the podcast, it's Randy Skretvedt. But before we begin, I have some more updates and things to mention. Firstly, we've received 2 more 5-star ratings in reviews in the last month. The first one of those reads, 5-star podcast. What a lovely podcast this is. When it drops into my podcast library to listen to, there is an instant wave of joy knowing that when I press play, I get taken to a world nearly 100 years ago, and it is a world of nothing but joy. Great guests who have given the listeners so many extra nuggets of information that we didn't know before, interspersed with really well-edited clips or songs from their movies. Patrick, sir, you are doing a fine job here. You make what is probably a difficult and time-consuming exercise look easy. I've not noticed any sound level issues. That obviously refers to a previous review from last month. So thank you for that. It's a great relief to me. It's a great listen either when commuting to and from work or generally pottering around the house. I thought at the start that a podcast a month would take too long to get to some of my favourite films that they have made, but to have already got to double whoopee, the speed is perfect. When I finish a podcast, which I'm always completely up to date with, then it makes me stick on a couple of films to watch, starting always with the one you've just reviewed. Keep up the good work, you're making a lot of people very happy, and pass on our thanks to your guests too, who are all excellent. And that was from Spencer. Spencer, thank you so much for taking the time to write that review. I really, really appreciate it. It made me feel so good to read that. And the second review reads, well, here's another nice podcast you've gotten me into. How have I only just discovered this amazing podcast just a few months ago? Having been a Laurel Hardy fan since I was a kid in the early 80s, this is just what the doctor ordered. The same doctor who said I might have hydrophosphates. Patrick's enthusiasm for his subject matter shines through every delightful minute of these deep dives into each of the boys' films. His guests are the creme de la creme of Laurel Hardy expertise, and the pace is always relaxed, allowing the experts to chat on and off topic in as much depth as they like, exploring every nook and cranny of each film, and thus ensuring their insights are preserved for posterity. His exploration of the silence has reawakened an interest in these films for me, which I have to admit I've neglected in the past. Patrick and his guests have accompanied me on many a long journey or walk this year, making the hours simply fly by. And I still have lots of episodes to catch up on and look forward to. Keep up the amazing work. I'll be with you until Atoll K. And that was from ADCB100. So thank you for that review. I do love to hear that you've gone back to to watch the films, especially the silence. If you've sort of neglected them in the past, that is really important to me to try and get these silence in the spotlight once more. So great stuff. Thank you for those. Also, a lovely email we've had sent through from Joe. And Joe said, just wanted to thank you for the work you are doing in keeping alive memories of the boys. I've been a fan for as long as I can or care to remember. I'm working my way through your podcast, watching each film in turn. Unfortunately, I've only reached number 19, so I have a way to go. Fortunately, the podcasts are both informative and entertaining. Keep up the good work, Joe. So thank you very much, Joe. Really, really appreciate you getting in touch. And again, I'm so pleased that you're going off and watching the films after listening to the podcast. Thank you to everybody for sending in messages. That's just one email of many that I get through, and also your comments on social media is very well received. Thank you to everyone. Even if I don't read them here, I do always read them, and like Stan, I will reply to you where I can. Russ and I have also had a lot of feedback following the release of issue 3 of our all-new Laurel and Hardy magazine. Now, they do get sent out in batches, so don't panic if you haven't received yours just yet. I'm sure it will be with you soon. In fact, just the other day, we received an email from Jeffrey Holland, who you may remember was my special guest on episode 28. And Jeffrey said, "Hi, boys. Thank you so much for the new magazine. It is spectacular. A genuine joy to sit and read straight from cover to cover. You don't believe me? I certainly do." Keep up the great work. Yours faithfully, Jeffrey Holland. That's lovely. Thank you, Jeff, for that. That's superb. And that was just one of the many messages of appreciation we've had for the magazine. If you'd like to subscribe to the magazine and get our new issue, which focuses on helpmates, featuring an exclusive article by today's guest, Randy Skretvedt, then just visit www.laurelandhardyfilms.com and you can sign up today. I also have 2 new patrons of the podcast to welcome this month. So welcome and thanks go to Steve McCarty and Andrew Llewellyn, both of whom signed up to the Plumtree tier. And so now they have access to all of the bonus podcasts and also a gift subscription to the magazine, as well as several other benefits. I've said before, my patrons are my sponsors, so your support means everything to me. So 1,000 thanks. If you aren't a patron and you'd like to become one and access exclusive podcasts and much, much more, you could also become a patron for just a small few dollars or pounds or euros a month. Just visit patreon.com, patreon.com, and search Laurel and Hardy Podcast, or even easier, just click the link in the episode notes. And finally, I'd like to say thank you and acknowledge the different countries around the world in which the podcast makes the top 10 in the podcast charts. And I've noticed over this past month especially that the Laurel and Hardy podcast reached the number 1 spot in the film history chart in Lithuania. In fact, over the past few weeks, 2 different episodes of the podcast have held 2 different positions in Lithuania's top 10 at the same time. So I've been really thrilled with that. So I do want to say ačiū to all my Lithuanian listeners. So that's all the updates for today. So let's crank that Model T, because we've got a radio to retrieve. Today's film in focus is Bacon Grubbers. It was a 2-reeler filmed February 18th to February 27th, 1929, and it was released on October 19th, 1929. It was produced by Hal Roach, directed by Lewis R. Foster, and photographed by George Stevens. Following the resignation of Leo McCary in December 1928, the Hal Roach Studios entered the uncharted waters of the new talkie era without a creative supervisor in charge. McCary had taken on the role of supervising director, overseeing all the studio's output late in 1927, filling the position previously held by F. Richard Jones, the latter having occupied the post since the early 1920s. Both gentlemen were incredibly talented and respected within the industry, and the departure left a sizable hole gaping at the organisation's upper echelon. Filling that void effectively was not going to be easy, but the search for McCary's replacement began immediately. In the meantime, however, as the adage goes, time waits for no man, nor indeed for no studio, and the Lot of Fun was now in the position of having to produce some of its most important and technically challenging comedy shorts since the studio began, without a supervising director. As a temporary interim measure, Hal Roach and Warren Doane stepped in to supervise all comedy productions on the lot until McCary's replacement could be secured. For the most part, the main series were in good hands. Having worked with and directed Roach's Little Rascals since their inception in 1921, Robert McGowan took responsibility for driving and developing the Our Gang series. Charlie Chase, who, alongside Leo McCarey, had successfully transformed his self-titled series of comedies from one to two reelers, would now take hold of both reins into the new world of the talkies. Chase was a competent and experienced pair of hands, having held the position of supervising director at the studio in 1920, overseeing all productions except for the Harold Lloyd series. And finally, the Laurel and Hardy team, which owed its very existence for the most part to Leo McCarey, was now solely under the creative stewardship of Stan Laurel. Having been schooled and guided by McCarey and Jones respectively in comedy creation and directing, Stan was now perfectly equipped to drive the series confidently. The first picture the boys tackled in the post-McCarey era was Bacon Grabbers, and it set Stan and Ollie as attachment officers from the local sheriff's office. The boys are tasked with serving a writ to reclaim a radio from a tough guy named Collis P. Kennedy. As alluded to by the name, the part of the bruiser who won't pay for his radio and won't hand it back either is played by Edgar Kennedy. There are some nice bits of business in the opening scene in the sheriff's office, with some classic mix-up gags involving hats, the writ, and a couple of internal doors. This sequence would be unashamedly recreated for their scene with Charles Middleton's character in the 1931 talkie Beau Hunks. Still, there's just enough individuality to each version to keep them both enjoyable in their own right. Here, the sheriff with the unenviable task of being in charge of Stan and Ollie is played by Eddie Baker in one of his numerous appearances with Laurel and Hardy. With their task finally assigned, writ in hand, their hats on their own heads, and having made it out of the correct door of the sheriff's office, the dynamic duo crank their waiting Model T into life, only to drive straight into the back of Charlie Hall's stationary truck. The impact damages the boy's radiator and water shoots over Ollie's behind. To fix the leak, Hardy stuffs his handkerchief into the radiator and the water stops. Initially, this scene was shot with Charlie Hall recommending the boys pour cream of wheat into the radiator, which would have messy consequences further down the road. And although this gag wasn't included in the film's final version, existing studio stills prove that it was likely shot but then discarded. The original script for Bacon Grabbers includes this same gag but appearing as a finale, and again, it wasn't used. It would, however, find a home in a Laurel and Hardy picture later that same year and used to good effect in the Hooskow. The originator of this particular gag appears to have been Charlie Hall himself. According to Hall's later reminiscences, quote, "In 1924, Fred Carno Jr. took a comedy act on tour and I was a member of the outfit. We went off to San Francisco and our conveyance was one of those very old types of Ford. Talk about rattle. The engine got very hot at one stage and this caused the radiator to leak. Steam came hissing out of the radiator cap like smoke from an express train, until finally we had to pull up and call it a petrol station. We asked them to fill up with oil and water, and while they were doing it we noticed the leaking radiator. It was just like a watering can. We could not get it fixed. Fred suddenly hit on a brainwave. He went into the grocery store and got 3 packets of breakfast food. This he put in the radiator. After a couple of minutes, the leak stopped, and off we went. After going several miles, we saw what we thought was snow passing by the windows. It was so thick it covered our windscreen, and we had to stop and wipe it. We then found that the snow was Fred's breakfast food, and it was pouring out of the radiator. We lifted the bonnet and saw a huge pudding. The engine was covered, and so were we, for we had forgotten to turn off the engine. Stan later used this in one of his comedies. And that was from the London Weekly News from September 3rd, 1938. Having repaired their radiator with a handkerchief, Stan and Ollie arrive at Kennedy's house. This was Edgar's first film back with the boys since his role as an angry motorist in Two Tars, and this is easily one of his most significant roles with Stan and Babe. The location used for Kennedy's house, still standing today, was at 10341 Bannockburn in the Cheviot Hills area of Los Angeles. At the time of filming, the property was the newly built residence of Elmer R. Regis, the chief recording engineer for Victor Recording Company and the man assigned to oversee all sound recording at the Hal Roach Studios. Regis' professionalism and unique skill set were quickly recognised, and he soon established himself as a highly valued and vital component of the studio's production team. The film's main plot has the boys attempting first to place the writ into the evasive Kennedy's hand, and then, once achieved, their next challenge is to seize possession of the radio from inside the house. There are some hilarious cat-and-mouse style sequences here, and the many attempts to serve Kennedy with the writ are excellent, usually ending up with the boys foiling themselves. On one occasion, they think they've succeeded, but they've only managed to press Stan's half-eaten sandwich into Kennedy's hand rather than the paper. In another sequence, Ollie is hilariously dragged down the path and across the road by a frightened, somewhat oversized dog, narrowly avoiding being run over by a passing car. The mechanics of this gag are not dissimilar to a more famous one performed a couple of years later in The Music Box, during which Mr. Hardy is dragged down a particular set of steps whilst clinging on to a crated piano. The dutiful attachment officers eventually manage to serve Kennedy with the writ, and their sense of relief is almost tangible. Accepting defeat over this first act, Grumpy Kennedy throws down the next gauntlet. Now try and get the radio. And the door is slammed shut. And so we start all over again, and with more great gags as the boys try to climb a ladder to enter the house through an open first floor window. There's a terrific scene where Ollie carries a ladder with Stan teetering on the top rungs. Hardy incredibly takes the weight of the laurel-topped ladder by resting the feet in the waistband of his trousers. Meanwhile, a little dog plays tug-of-war with Ollie's braces, or suspenders, depending on which side of the Atlantic you wear them. And if that's not enough, whilst all this is happening, Kennedy pokes his head out of the window and aims a shotgun in Stan's face. Stan's terrified reaction is hilarious. And then, as with all sash windows in Laurel and Hardy movies, Kennedy's window slides shut and cracks down onto the back of his balding head, causing him to pull the trigger accidentally. Thankfully, he misses Stan, but instead hits a fire hydrant, which instantly explodes and soaks a conveniently placed street cop played by Harry Bernard. It's a great sequence of gags, ending with the appearance of Bernard, another regular supporting player in the boys' pictures, appearing in no less than 26 films with Laurel and Hardy over the years. The soggy cop, now drawn into the action, gets involved and assists by immediately retrieving the radio. The film culminates with the boys gloating smugly until a timely steamroller appears. It flattens the much contested radio left in the middle of the road, causing much amusement for Kennedy. His joy is short-lived, though, as suddenly his wife appears on the lawn to celebrate the good news that she's just paid off the money and they now own the radio. So it's the boys' turn to laugh, but their joy is quickly wiped away when the steamroller promptly returns and rolls right over the boys' Model T Ford, crushing it completely. Now, it's worth noting here that Jean Harlow plays Mrs. Kennedy in the last of her 3 fleeting appearances with Stan and Babe, the other 2 being Liberty and Double Whoopee. In addition to these, her photo can also be seen in 2 later Laurel and Hardy pictures, firstly on the mantelpiece in Bratz, and then as the accompanying photo to the heartbreaking letter from Jeannie Weenie that provides the impetus for Stan and Ollie to join the Foreign Legion in Beau Hunks. Although Bacon Grabbers was filmed in February 1929, it wasn't released until October. The demands of exhibitors and their paying audiences were now for the fashionable talkies, and silent pictures quickly became museum pieces. The Roach Studios keenly responded by producing as many talkies as they could, as quickly as possible, and interspersing their releases with the final few silent pictures. By the time Bacon Grabbers was finally released to theatres, 5 all-talking Laurel and Hardy comedies had already been consumed by the movie-going masses, namely Unaccustomed as We Are, Birthmarks, Men o' War, Perfect Day, and They Go Boom, and one has to wonder how the boys' final 2 silent films, Bacon Grabbers and Angora Love, were received by those same audiences. The dearth of exhibitor and trade reviews for these last 2 silent Laurel and Hardy comedies is perhaps a sign of the lack of demand for silent shorts by the autumn of 1929. Both Bacon Grabbers and Angora Love were released with synchronised music and sound effects tracks in line with several of their earlier silents. This time the music was recorded using only a pipe organ instead of a full orchestra score. Were contemporary audiences disappointed to be presented with the old silent versions of Stan and Ollie again after enjoying not only the sight but also the wonderful sounds of the boys' voices? This review arguably suggests so. Quote, Bacon Grabbers. This is one of Laurel and Hardy's synchronised comedies, and while good, it has organ accompaniment, which is not so good after running them in talking pictures. And that was from the Bedford Theatre in Bedford in Exhibitors Herald World, 31st of May, 1930. Public taste and the movie industry itself were changing fast. Moviegoers now not only wanted to see their favourite stars, but hear them as well. Nervous actors and their employers could only hope that their fans would accept their voices. This was an extremely anxious time as many careers were made and broken by this massive development. Production of all talking comedies was about to begin at the Hal Roach Studios, but there was still one more Laurel and Hardy silent short to be made. Helping me to retrieve an unpaid-for radio today and discuss the classic Laurel and Hardy short at the same time is returning guest, Laurel and Hardy expert, film historian and author. It's Randy Skretvedt. So welcome back to the Laurel and Hardy Podcast, Randy.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. It's wonderful to be here again. Thank you for inviting me.
It's always exciting to have you on, Randy. Always looking forward to the knowledge that you impart. I shall listen intently. So today we are talking about Bacon Grabbers, of course, 1929's Bacon Grabbers, and I've got to say it's one of my favourite silent shorts. I love Bacon Grabbers. Quite often overlooked, I think.
Yes, I would agree with you on both counts. I like it a lot because it does not go back to the reciprocal destruction mass melee type of thing at the end. It could have, but I think that device was getting to be pretty well worn by the time of Bacon Grabbers, which is their next to last silent short. It's rather refreshing to see a Laurel and Hardy silent that doesn't have a mass of people ripping their trousers or throwing pies, or good as those sequences are. It became a little bit too much of a crutch to rely on at the end of the picture. I mean, they'd throw mud at each other and should married men go home, and rocks in the finishing touch, and hats off. It's like, how many times can you do that?
See, I mean, I'm always quite disappointed when watching Double Whoopee, because that is quite a different Laurel and Hardy film, I always think, up until the end, and then we get the same old kind of pastiche of ripping things off and tearing, setting fire to
the eye poking. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, it's just a little bit of a cheap way out. I think it's a disappointing end to that film. But
they do have the nice gag at the elevator with the end, though.
Yes, that's true. Yeah,
and again that like the cake from Soup to Nuts follows the comedy rule of three.
That's right.
Three is funny. Right. Don't do any more. You do that gag near the beginning of your film, somewhere in the middle, and then you use it as your topper at the final part of the film.
So we're talking about Bacon Grabbers. Leo McCarey has left at this point. He's finally gone, exited stage left. We have no supervising director at the studio. And I just find this it's a really interesting period now, because we've got a very important and technically challenging situation. We're moving into the talkies with no supervising director in charge. I mean, it must have been,
I think you could make the case that Hal Roach was essentially the supervising director, and because he, as he said, he always saw the dailies, and he didn't believe in criticizing people on the set, but he would look at the footage from the day before, and if there was something he didn't like, they'd do it again. But you also had people who were pretty much in charge of the individual units. Like you had Bob McGowan for Our Gang, and you had Leo McCarey for Charlie Chase. I guess Charlie and Jimmy Parrott were taking care of Charlie Chase. Bacon Grabbers is right smack in the middle of the 6-film tenure of Lewis Foster as director. He's interesting because he did the last 3 silents and the first 3 talkies. So he's really the director who shepherded them into that new technology. And I think they probably, regretted the transfer to sound early on because Bacon Grabbers, a lot of it's shot outdoors, uh, and it would have been very difficult to film this in sound. You'd have to bring in a generator, a power generator. You'd have to have the camera all hooked up to sound equipment. You'd have to have the boom mic there and make sure that you don't get that into the shot. They still would bring in, I don't know if they did in the silent days, but they certainly did in the talkie days. Even if they're shooting outdoors, they brought in a lot of lights because of shadows. So anyway, it would have been much more cumbersome. And Bacon Grabbers is, one of the last silents where you have that wonderful outdoor ambience, and it's fun to see how wide open the surrounding area is. I mean, it's all houses now, very expensive houses now. And in fact, the Bacon Grabbers house itself was newly built. I can tell you about the house if you're interested
Yes.
right now. Well,
Yes. Let's go for it.
it still stands, and let's see if I can find it here. It's on Bannockburn. It's right near the big business house. Um, let's see if we can find it. Here it is. It's at 10341 Bannockburn Drive. And it's if you go to the big business house, which is at Dunleer Drive, well, the Bacon Grabbers house is 0.2 of a mile southwest from the big business house. So 10341 Bannockburn. And you don't see much of the house now because there's a lot of trees around it, and I think there's a fence around it there. But you can see the top of the roof. And the house had been completed in 1928, and in October of 1928, a new employee of the Hal Roach Studios, Elmer Regis, moved in because he was busy designing and creating the sound recording equipment for the Hal Roach Studios. Roach knew that sound was the wave of the future, and he needed to get sound recording equipment installed in his studio. And so Elmer Regis came out from the Victor Talking Machine Company in Camden, New Jersey, and needed a place to stay. So I think he was just renting the house at this point. But he was there for quite some time because his grandson, Craig, whom I've gotten to know through Facebook, sent me scans of some family photos in front of the house. And there's one of his dad, little Elmer Jr., standing in front of the doorway. And you get to see the full, you don't really get to see much of the entire house in the film. Mainly you see the doorways. But these are wonderful shots. I think I've got them in Magic Behind the Movies. So when the Roach Studio needed to use a house, it was always smarter, as with Big Business and with Perfect Day, to use a house that belonged to somebody at the studio, because they would understand that whatever damage was incurred to the house would be repaired quickly, because the studio had an army of carpenters and plasterers and painters, and they could fix this up very quickly. So anyway, Elmer Regis, I don't think his family had moved out yet from New Jersey. I think he was just there all by himself, and so obviously he wanted to have a good working relationship with his new employers. Actually, I think he was still being paid by the Victor Company, but anyway, he was going to be working at the Roach lot. So yeah, he not only allowed them to film outside the house, but they had to clearly go inside for that shot of Kennedy shooting through the window, looking outside. So the camera had to go inside the house at one point. So happily, Mrs. Regis wasn't there to say, "What are you doing?" That probably would have been her reaction. So,
do you know when Elmo actually joined the Roach staff? Because as you say, I'm pretty sure he was still a Victor employee at this point.
Yeah, they brought out 6. There was a crew of 9. I remember this from Harvey Wasden saying this. Harvey Wasden said the sound crew when they first started was 9 people. 3 of them were local from LA, and 6 of them were brought out from Camden. And God bless him, my good friend John Tefteller, who is a renowned collector and historian of old recordings, but on the side has also amassed a fantastic collection of Laurel and Hardy stills. he brought to me it was in the envelope. It was a still sent by one of the sound engineers to his mother. Sig Baden was the guy's name, Baden. Sig, Sig was his first name. And bless him, he had a photograph of the whole crew from Camden with Warren Doan, the Roach executive whom you mentioned, and Stan and Babe. And then he had a little flap of paper on which he had written the names of each of the guys in the photograph.
Oh, fantastic.
So, thank you. I might have been able to find the names in the payrolls, but wouldn't have known who was who. And because he did that, and because John Tefteller found it and loaned it to me, I was able to say, well, that's James Green there, and that's William Harrison. So I don't recall offhand precisely the date when they arrived, but I'm sure it's in a section of Magic Behind the Movies called A Sound Future. So as close as I can come to it, it will be in there.
Yeah, is that image that John showed you? Was that in your book as well?
I'm sure it is. It was too good a still not to use.
Oh, it might.
Let's see.
Yeah, they might be on. Is it where they're leaning up against the back of the truck?
Yes. Let's see here. Yes, it's on page 180. And we have in order Sig C. Baden, Jimmy Green, Warren Doan, Elmer Regis, Stan, Jack Whittaker, Babe, Aldebert Henry Dip Neese, and John G. Harrison. So there they are in all their glory. And then there's also a shot of the sound truck in front of the administration building, and everybody came out to look at it, including Edgar Kennedy, whom you can see, and Bob McGowan also. So anyway, nice to know, nice to have names and faces together so that we know who's who. But anyway, Elmer Regis gave permission to use his rental house. I don't know who owned the house at the time. Maybe they wouldn't have known or had approved, but we weren't going to tell them about it. But the house is still there in good repair.
Big Business.
I'm sorry?
I say, certainly if they'd seen Big Business, they wouldn't have approved.
Well, I can tell you something else about Big Business, too. Recently, I talked to the niece of William Terhune. Sunny Turner is her name. And she said the story that she always heard, and this kind of reconciles the two accounts of the wrong house. She said that Roach rented the house from William Terhune and said, come back in 10 days. It was Christmas week anyway. Come back in 10 days. We'll have everything all put back together. You'll never know anything ever happened. Okay, fine. So Terhune goes off on vacation, but he came back early and they were still filming. And he was not happy with the amount of destruction that had been leveled at his house. So that's where the element of coming back and saying, what are you doing to my house? That's where that enters in.
That's interesting.
But it was not the wrong house. It was always the right house. It was just that the person who owned the right house was a little bit dismayed at the level of destruction. He didn't know that they were going to be that thorough about it. And there is a still. I've seen a still of, I'm sure it's Terhune standing in the midst of the house and shrugging as if to say, what happened? I know I've seen that still. So anyway, that made sense to me that it was Terhune's house all along. It was never the wrong house, but there was an element of, hey, what are you doing to my house? And, Mr. Roach, being a good storyteller, could have embellished that a bit.
Yes.
So
yeah, just a bit. That's great. No, that's really good. That makes a lot of sense, actually. I think that makes a lot more sense than previously.
Right.
That's great. Edgar Kennedy, as you mentioned, because obviously he was excellent in Bacon Grabbers. Probably his biggest role, I would think. With the boys.
Well, of course, he's very prominent in Leave 'Em Laughing, and he had been a director for them. Let me see. Yeah, this is one of their most sustained encounters with him. The last one had been in Two Tars, where he's one of the motorists. And between that, he'd been in some other Roach shorts. He's in a Charlie Chase short called Off to Buffalo. and a Charlie Rogers starring short, which would be interesting to see, called When Money Comes. And then another short, an all-star short called Thundering Toupees. And of course, Edgar Kennedy would be someone who would be who could use one of those. And he also stars in a short called Why Is a Plumber? There's so many odd roach shorts, and particularly MGMs from the late silent period that I don't seem to survive. They're not everything exists, and so if prints of those are around somewhere, it would sure be nice to see. I mean, that might be another project for Serge Bromberg and company to do after they finish Laurel and Hardy, would be just other Hal Roach shorts that are just not available. I like his name in the film. Now it's Collis P. Kennedy. Now, what's interesting is I think it's a hybrid of names of two different people. There was a Colin, C-O-L-I-N, Colin B. Kennedy, who made Deluxe radios. He was a well-known radio manufacturer. And I have an ad. My friend Ed Watts sent me a newspaper ad for one of his radios, and it says, and this is similar to the radio that you see in the film. It's a radio console model, beautiful two-tone walnut encasement, embodying every detail of design and equipment that has made a name for Kennedy. Only $225. Now that's in 1929 money, so that's a significant expenditure. Then there was also a railroad tycoon by the name of Collis P. Huntington. So you have Colin B. Kennedy and Collis P. Huntington. So I think they combined the two. And the other thing is Collis is funny, and I'm not even sure if Beanie Walker or whoever came up with the name was aware of this, but it's an Old English name, and it means dark-haired coal miner. Now, that is not what you would use to describe Edgar Kennedy, who went bald quite early on, but maybe that was supposed to be an ironic joke as well. So his character name is an interesting amalgamation of three different possibilities there. Colin B. Kennedy and Collis P. Huntington and dark-haired coal miner. So, but yes, and it's also interesting because this film points up the popularity of radio. Commercial radio broadcasting had begun in 1920 in America. They always say that the first known commercial broadcast, or on what became a commercial station, was KDKA out of Pittsburgh, and they were broadcasting election returns for, let's see, 1920. Well, it would have been Harding. Harding won. Warren G. Harding was the winning president. Harding and Coolidge. And so within, this is going now 9 years after that. And by this time, radio has really become something that was actually damaging attendance at movies. People were staying home to listen to radio, much as they would 20 years later when television came in.
I thought you were going to meet me.
I was. But I've got to put the aerial up. Mrs. Hardy wants to get Japan.
Gee, I'd like to hear Japan, too. Do you mind if I help you?
I don't mind. That is, if you'll help me.
And you already had Amos and Andy on radio, and you did have some of the show. You had Rudy Valley and the Fleischman Hour, and some of the shows which carried into the 30s were already broadcasting in 1929. So the formats of programming, soap operas and situation comedies and variety shows, were already becoming together in 1929. So radio was becoming quite an industry. And in fact, radio formed a movie studio. What we know as RKO Radio Pictures was really bankrolled primarily by David Sarnoff of the Radio Corporation of America. He formed a coalition with Joseph P. Kennedy, later the father of John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, who had owned the film booking office studio, and they bought up an old vaudeville circuit called the Keith Orpheum circuit. So it was Radio Keith Orpheum became RKO. So radio money basically created a whole new movie studio because Sarnoff wanted to implement his audio equipment in movie theaters. And that's the reason why he got into the movie business, because he said there's all these films that have been showing, theaters have been showing silent films, and they're all going to need amplifiers and audio equipment and speakers, and I can provide all of those. So I'm going to not only do that, but I'm going to start a whole new studio. So radio was making its inroads into motion pictures at the time. There's a wonderful still for the finishing touch where Babe had brought along on location his portable radio. A portable radio at that time was, I suppose, about 3 feet wide and had tubes in it. So that's a portable radio at that time.
Listen! I think you better let that radio go.
I should say not. I'll get that thing working if it's the last thing I do. Come on.
And he also took that when the Roach Gang went up to Vancouver in 1928, so they could all get some legal booze. I have pictures of them camping around outside having a meal, and Babe's radio is there in those photographs. In fact, I actually know what the model is. I can't remember it offhand, but somewhere in the book, I think probably the caption for that still in the finishing touch chapter, I have the actual name of that particular model.
Yes, I'm sure you do.
So
So
radio is a key part of Bacon Grabbers, and of course, Laurel and Hardy are repo men, as we would call them today.
The bailiffs we have in the UK.
Okay. Well, it's interesting here. They're on the side of the law again, as they are occasionally. You know, they make films where they're on either side of the law, and but they're not. Well, they're not detectives this time. You know, they're detectives and do detectives think, and they're policemen in the Midnight Patrol, and they're sort of kind of detectives again in The Big Noise and The Bullfighters, but this time they're attachment officers. And so they have to serve a subpoena to Mr. Kennedy to get him into court, small claims court, I would imagine, so that whoever owns the radio or who's owed the payments can get the money. And so so most of the film is about just getting that precious document into the hands of Edgar Kennedy. And there were many sneaky attachment officers who would come up with all sorts of clever ways of getting that paper into the hands of the person who needed to be served. So, you know, they probably the gag men had probably read something about that in the newspaper, or maybe one of them had been served like that, and they thought that would
possibly
be a good idea for Laurel and Hardy to not be clever or adept at getting the paper into the hand of the transgressor. And you know, that's the great. I love the middle section of the film, which is so many different ways of not getting the paper into Edgar Kennedy's hands. Particularly when Stan has a sandwich, he decides it's time for a lunch break, even though his pocket watch only has one hand on it. You can't really tell what time it is. And he says, well, he's supposed to be guarding that door, and instead he's very lackadaisical about it. He's just kind of just standing outside, just hanging out, and he starts to eat the sandwich. And of course, when the time comes to put something into Edgar Kennedy's hands, he puts the sandwich into his hands instead of the writ of attachment.
Yes.
So,
yeah, there's some really good gags in that. And I'm just going back to the start when they're in the sheriff's office as well. We have those routines with the hat swapping, and is it Eddie Baker? I think is the sheriff, isn't he?
Yes. Hats and doors are always problematic for Laurel and Hardy, and they pretty much rework that scene in Beau Hunks, trying to get out of Charles Middleton's office. And it's amazing, you know, how many variations they can do on getting the hats and the doors mixed up. And that was different in the film. I will quote from myself here. Please do. At the start of the film, Stan and Ollie were not asleep in the sheriff's office. They were eager to get their first job. So much so that they hop up from the bench on which they're sitting whenever the sheriff calls for a man to come get his assignment. When all the other officers are gone, the boys finally get their orders. Stan gets his foot caught in a wastebasket in his excitement, then leaves his hat on the sheriff's desk before heading out. The boys soon return and explain that they haven't gotten their officers' badges yet. The sheriff pulls out what the script calls 2 bum star badges from a cigar box filled with miscellaneous stuff, and then tells them to get going. So the opening scene was a little bit different. And yes, we have Eddie Baker in the film, whose real name was Edwin King Baker. Edwin King Baker. He was born in Davis, West Virginia on November 17th, 1897. He was born into a theatrical family. And so when his folks were out on the road doing vaudeville or stock company work, by the time Eddie was 12, he was pretty much living on his own in Los Angeles. He was in a boarding house on South Hope Street in Los Angeles. And when he was a teenager, he joined the parents' troupe and toured the East in the plays Ye Old District School and Confederate Spy. And he got into the movies when he was 15. He was a prop boy for the Biograph Company and began acting in 1917 in short comedies for the Victor Film Company, starring Eileen and Edward Sedgwick. Edward Sedgwick is a name that we know as a comedy director for Buster Keaton and other people, and air raid wardens, in fact. Eddie Baker was also a comedy director, and he played villains for Gail Henry, who also figures into Bacon Grabbers. So anyway, Eddie was a very prominent guy. He's in a lot of the solo Stan Laurel comedies at Roach's. In fact, he actually goes back further with Stan Laurel. He's in Huns and Hyphens, which is Stan Laurel and Larry Seaman at Vitagraph. But he's in lots of Roach Stan Laurel solo comedies. He's in Under Two Jags, Oranges and Lemons, Smithy, and then he worked a lot at Senate, and he worked quite a bit into the early 30s. He was the first secretary of the Screen Actors Guild. But in 1936, he made a major career shift. And I guess because he played lawmen so many times, he became a patrolman for the California Highway Patrol, which he did from 1936 through 1956. And then he got back into acting again and continued doing that right up until he died in February of 1968. So interesting. Wow. He had a 20-year hiatus pretty much from acting. But then got into it. I met his widow. His widow's name was Christine, and she came with Mabel Langdon, Harry Langdon's widow, to one of our Orange County meetings back in the 70s. And I remember I was getting things ready for the meeting, but I remember walking by them, and they were both talking very animatedly about Arvid Gillstrom. Arvid Gillstrom was a comedy film director. I think he died in the early 30s, but he had made a lot of films with Harry Langdon. And so they were both remembering Arvid Gillstrom. And I wish I could have just stopped and listened to them and or had a tape recorder going on their conversation. But anyway, they were both there at one of the meetings I put on back in Orange County back in almost 50 years ago. Wow. So that's brilliant. So yeah, Eddie Baker is prominent, and he's kind of similar to Frank Brownlee in Do Detectives Think, who similarly is giving them their orders.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And then, of course, we come out of we finally get out of the right door, and we meet Charlie Hall in the street.
So what?
And I love the stills from Bacon Grabbers with Charlie Hall, because obviously there's a deleted scene there, isn't there, with the cream of wheat in the radiator.
Right. Well, the rice gag that we know from the Huskow was originally for this film, and I think there's another film also that they were planning to use it and didn't, and I've forgotten which one that is. But anyway, yes, it's the same premise. Instead of rice, he says, put some cream of wheat into the leaking radiator, because Charlie Hall's truck has backed into it, and Charlie Hall's truck has punctured their car's radiator. Now, it's also interesting that he's at fault. I think in the film, Laurel and Hardy accidentally bang into the back of Charlie Hall's car, which is more, I mean, that's more characteristic.
Yes.
But anyway, the cream of wheat works for a while, but then it starts to come spraying out of the radiator, and it sprays the windshield, so they can't see where they're going. And worse than that, it's also coming out of the exhaust pipe. So when they stop at an intersection, it sprays a curious dog, 2 refined young ladies seated on a bench, a very unfortunate manhole worker, and of course a cop. So that was a rather elaborate gag that they had planned, but I don't know how far along they got in filming. Obviously, they filmed the first part of it, because there's a still of them with a package of cream of wheat and Charlie Hall going, see, that'll work. So
that would have been a great scene. I'd have loved to see that one.
Yeah,
that sounds really good.
Probably just cut for time. If this could have been a 3-reeler, that would have been a nice gag to have. And it also, maybe I'll just go ahead and mention it now, because that gag also formed the original ending of the film. The original ending of the film is the steamroller comes by and it demolishes Kennedy's radio, but that's all. It doesn't demolish their car. And there is a still showing Charlie Rogers as the driver of the steamroller. Now, whether or not you originally saw him or not, I don't know, but he did get into costume, and there is a still of them looking up at him as he's standing in the cab of the steamroller. So anyway, it demolishes the radio and then just goes on. And then Laurel and Hardy get into their car and they try to start it up, and it explodes all by itself. And then who should come along at that precise moment but Charlie Hall? And Laurel and Hardy say, "Your cream of wheat wrecked our radiator and wrecked our car." And Charlie says, "It wrecked mine too," which is why he's walking, you see. Now, maybe they didn't want to incur the wrath or a lawsuit from the cream of wheat people. not that there are going to be too many customers using cream of wheat to put in the radiator, and maybe that's why they don't have a brand product in the Hooskow. They just say rice.
I'll tell you how to stop that leak. Put some rice in the radiator.
Rice could be anybody, so no rice manufacturer is going to get after them for that. But cream of wheat is a very specific product, which you can still buy. So anyway, it was interesting that, they always liked to, and I admire this about Laurel and Hardy because so many comedians don't, is whatever element they introduce into the film, they always tie it up, except for Bonnie Scotland, which has a whole bunch of loose ends. But that film was a mess anyway. But having introduced the cream of wheat gag near the beginning of the film, they were going to use it as the finale. They always try to tie things up. I remember George Marshall saying that they had come up with the idea of the cook being in the army jail with them, and vowing his vengeance, and then Stan said, well that's got to be our ending. They hadn't thought of that for the ending, but since they had this new scene where they're in jail with George Marshall as the cook, they said, well, that's our ending, is you come back and now I've got my knife. So that was the inspiration for that. So they always tried to have things all nicely wrapped up and resolved at the end of the picture, even in a short.
Now, do you know who originated the story of the cream of wheat? Do you know where that came from?
Evidently Charlie Hall.
Yes, that's right.
Charlie Hall and Fred Carno Jr.
That's it. It's a great story. Really, really good story.
I don't know if they actually used cream of wheat, but they evidently were on a vaudeville tour together.
It was Davy Crump, when I spoke to him after his Carno book came out, he flagged this one up. So I looked up the original piece, and it was from the London Weekly News, September 3rd, 1938, interview with Charlie Hall. And he says in 1924, Fred Carno Jr. took a comedy act on tour, and I was a member of the outfit. We went off to San Francisco, and our conveyance was one of those old types of Ford. The engine got very hot at one stage, and this caused the radiator to leak. Steam came hissing out of the radiator cap like smoke from an express train, until finally we had to pull up and call it a petrol station. We asked them to fill up with oil and water, and while they were doing it, we noticed the leaking radiator. It was just like a watering can. We could not get it fixed. Fred suddenly hit on a brainwave. He went into the grocery store and got 3 packets of breakfast food. This he put in the radiator. After a couple of minutes, the leak stopped, and off we went. After going several miles, we saw what we thought was snow passing by the windows. It was so thick, it covered our windscreen, and we had to stop and wipe it. We then found that the snow was Fred's breakfast food, and it was pouring out of the radiator. We lifted the bonnet and saw a huge pudding. the engine was covered, and so were we, for we had forgotten to turn off the engine. Stan later used this in one of his comedies.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, you know, you use whatever good ideas from whatever source you can find.
Exactly.
Very good. Yeah,
exactly.
no, great to have that story.
It is. It's really, really good.
You see, that's something which is not in my book because I didn't learn that until after the book was out. So new things are coming along all the time.
This is the trouble. Well, it's going in my book.
Good. Yeah,
I can tell you that.
I need to write other books now. So
that's it. We've got a lot
everything.
more stuff.
Yeah.
So we got Charlie Hall, love Charlie Hall, and then we're off to Kennedy's house. We've talked about where the location of that is, but yeah, those gags with Edgar Kennedy, I think they're just absolutely superb. How they trying to get that into his hand is just wonderful. Also, there's a little bit of a blooper in the film where during the ladder sequence, they've got at one point they're trying to get into the upper story of the house through a window. And Stan is atop a ladder, and Ollie is holding the ladder. Well, there's a couple of shots there where if you look at the shadow of the ladder on the ground, you see that there's nobody there at all. It's just Ollie holding an empty ladder, just holding the ladder. Yes. Because at the top of the shot, you don't see that Stan's not there, but the shadow, unfortunately, is their giveaway. And you can also tell that it doubles when they fall. When there's the backward fall out of the window, the ladder falls back, and Ollie and Stan both fall. There are two buddies in this film. There's Buddy the dog, and we see Buddy the dog in, let's see here, in From Soup to Nuts, and we also see him later on in Perfect Day, where you actually is that Buddy that goes under the table and From
Soup
to Nuts?
Yeah, and you also you hear Edgar Kennedy in Perfect Day. He's petting the dog, saying, "Come on, Buddy, it's okay, Buddy."
Oh, of course he is.
Who was probably a little bit excited by all of the explosions and things.
And sandwiches.
So, yes, there was something else with Buddy in the film, too, in the original script. Let's see here. As written, Buddy goes to Kennedy's front door and finds the writ, which Ollie has dropped. Kennedy then opens the door, takes the writ from the dog, and is about to light it with a match. But Stan and Ollie arrive on the scene just in time and blow it out. Kennedy has the paper in his hands, thanks to the dog, not to the boys, and that is that. So that would have been funny, too, for the dog to actually serve the paper to Kennedy. Sometimes you wonder sometimes why these great things in the script didn't wind up in the picture. And the movie's wonderful, but these variations on what's in the movie are often very funny. Well, the other buddy, I was really, really happy to identify this young man. In fact, this was one of my key goals when I was rewriting Magic Behind the Movies, was to identify this kid because he's prominent in Bacon Grabbers and in Angora Love, where he's the boy who realizes that the goat is not in front of the pet store, and he alerts the pet shop owner, whose name I forget right now, but he's the same actor who plays Gillette, Buster Keaton's assistant in Sherlock Jr. And he's also the theater manager in Sherlock Jr. So anyway, that's for Angora Love. That's your next one.
Yes.
But the child actor, his name was Jack Vernon Moore, or Buddy Moore, and he was born March 7th, 1920. So he's not quite 9 years old at the time that they made this. This is in February of 29. So he had about a month to go before he would turn 9 years old. He lived in Azusa, California. I was just there last weekend with his parents and 3 sisters and 2 brothers. And, of course, he's also in Angora Love. He's in the crowd of neighbors in Perfect Day and in an Our Gang short called Shivering Shakespeare, where the kids put on a play. He's one of the kids. And it appears that he had a deleted scene in Helpmates because I found him in the payrolls ascribed to that production. But there was nothing in the script that indicated that there was a young boy in it. But for some reason, he was paid for being in Helpmates. Now, sometimes they charge off expenses for one production to another one, so that might be what they did. That's why supposedly blockheads cost more to make than Devil's Brother and Sons of the Desert combined, which is nonsense because the whole reason Blockheads was made was because it was going to be quick and cheap.
Right.
So
right.
Anyway, Buddy Moore went to the Cummock School or the Cumnock School in Los Angeles, which emphasized the performing arts. And we don't know if he made any other movies. He probably did that we don't know about. He died at 65 in Los Angeles on March 29th, 1985. So I don't know a lot about his life. I'd like to know more because he's important in a couple of films, but at least I was able to identify him. It's always frustrating when you have people who are prominent in the film and you just don't have a name for them.
Yes, yeah. Do you have the script for Helpmates? There's no mention of him in the script.
For Helpmates? Yeah, I have Helpmates.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, there's no mention of a young boy in there.
Nope. I have it's about 20 feet away from me right now. And Helpmates is a script that is very, very close to the movie. Much more so than almost any other script I've ever seen. There's one extra little dialogue exchange, which I think they filmed and cut because there's a lap dissolve where it would have been. And the ending was a little bit different, where Stan was supposed to join Ollie sitting in the chair. And also somehow the phone was still working and Ollie gets a call saying that his fire insurance has just run out, which is a little contrived. I'm glad they did it as they filmed it. But other than that, it is a twin to the film, which was surprising because, as Hal Roach said time and time again, 50% of what's in the script will not play. And that's usually what you find when you look at the scripts. You find that about half of it is familiar to you from watching the movie, and the other half of it is, as with Bacon Grabbers, really funny stuff, which isn't in the film. And sometimes it's, what were they thinking? Sometimes you go, what? What? Why would they ever think that would work? So, happily, we don't have any of those instances in the Bacon Grabber script.
Absolutely.
Which I hope I dictated entirely because I have a lot of things that I dictated on tape 40 years ago, which I don't have in text, and there may be some other scripts, some other complete scripts on those tapes that I dictated years ago, and I'm always on the lookout for more shorts scripts for perhaps a Laurel and Hardy Movie Scripts Volume 3. So there's still plenty of them out there that I don't have as yet. So
you'll have to publish a list of the ones you're missing.
Yes, I will. I did just recently, through the courtesy of Richard Bann, I just got the one for Sailors Beware.
Oh, fantastic!
So there's one more. Oh, and I also just recently won at auction a 1915 script for Hurley, Stan, and Wren in The Nutty Burglars. Isn't that something? Okay. How many copies of that do you think survive? I think one. And I got it for $200, which I thought was quite a bargain, actually.
That sounds a bargain. It does.
So it had that, and it had a contract for the Gus Sun vaudeville circuit, which was real small-time vaudeville, and it's signed by Edgar Hurley. So, I was really, really happy to get that because we know what acts Stan did in vaudeville. There was Raffles the dentist, and there was No Mother to Guide Her, and The Nutty Burglars, which sort of transformed into the Keystone Trio, basically the same sketch, but now with Stan as Charlie Chaplin. But I don't recall ever seeing the actual script for these things before. So nice to know what he did 3 times a day for for a couple or 3 years.
Amazing.
So
what a find.
So that will get out to the public in something somewhere from me. So
watch the space, love it.
Well, anytime I'm able to get these wonderful artifacts, the whole point of getting them is to get them out to the fantastic. Laurel and Hardy admirers, so it's part of the historical record.
Absolutely. No, that's a credit to you, Randy. That's great. So talking of dogs, there's a massive dog also in Bacon Grabbers.
Yeah.
Do we know who that is?
No, I don't know the name of the big dog, but seems to be genuinely frightened by the phony dog.
Yes, the phony dog.
Yeah, let me see if I can find. I've got something about the phony, which is like the weirdest prop.
Yes,
In
yeah, because that turns up in other films, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's in an R gang. Let's see if I can find it here in my. There it is. Yeah. Okay. Probably the strangest prop in any Laurel and Hardy film, and it's in a 1926 short called "Along Came Auntie." And Babe is in that, and Vivian Oakland uses it to frighten away a process server, played by Tyler Brooke. So we need to go back and look at that and see if there might be any similar gags used between Along Came Auntie and Bacon Grabbers. And you can also see it, not very prominently, but there's an R gang comedy called Bargain Day. And the poor little rich girl is blonde Shirley Jean Rickert, and she has all sorts of toys in her playroom, and that phony dog is in there as well. So, and it looks like it was used as a ventriloquist puppet because it's got a string on it to open the mouth. So it almost looks like like a ventriloquist dummy for if you did an act with a prop bulldog. But
that's right.
I like the way that the big dog seems genuinely scared of it.
It does, yeah.
And runs.
And we have that great gag where it's dragging Babe down the path.
Yeah, or Babe's double.
Babe's double.
Probably Cy Slocum at this point.
Yes.
And then the well-timed arrival of the car right after that.
That's right.
The car that almost hits him. So yeah, you always wonder about things like that. There weren't too many of those, gags where you really worry about the safety of the actors in Roach comedies, but in Max Sennett comedies, there are several where cars and trains are, look to be on a collision course, and boy, they avoid it at the very last moment, and
yes,
it's thrilling but terrifying, But yeah, Cy Slocum was. I think the double at this point for Babe was Cy Slocum, whose real name was Lyle Edward Asher. Now, why he would change his name to Cy Slocum, I have no idea. But he was from Illinois, born in 1902 on January 7th. And he was in film work until the late 1940s, and then he became a carpenter and a professional bronco rider.
Hey,
so he never quite gave up the dangerous life, but he went from stuntman to bronco rider. So he evidently was someone who had a passion for physical injury.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. I'm just trying to think which. Here we go. Along Came Auntie. I was looking at Along Came Auntie, and not that long ago when I was doing my episode on That's My Wife, because the storyline of That's My Wife is very similar to Along Came Auntie. And that's when I spotted this dog. I was, that's the same dog. So, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well,
that's an interesting
one.
Vivian Oakland is to inherit a fortune from her aunt, providing she proves that she is still happily married to her husband,
Here we go
played by Babe Hardy. The snag is that Oakland has divorced Hardy and married another man, Glenn Tryon. As the divorce-hating aunt typically arrives to stay, Oakland realises that her new lodger is her ex-husband. The three must put on a show to fool the aunt for Oakland to secure the money. It's one of these, you've got to be married to get the the money and all that kind of stuff. So it turns into a bit of a farce, and Glenn Tryon dresses up as a woman, as Stanley do, and That's My Wife. So, yeah, it's quite good.
As he does again in 45 Minutes from Hollywood. So, yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
seems like any clean-shaven comedian at the Roach Studios was going to be drafted into dressing up as a woman at some point. Well, Stan Laurel did. We don't realize this, but Stan Laurel did that from what? September of 1918 through January of 1922, I think. I mean, he would do it 3 times a day, because he did this vaudeville sketch called No Mother to Guide Her, in which he played this old biddy, as they used to call them. So performing in drag was nothing unusual for him, because he did it for 3 years or 4 years.
Yeah, I suspect it was probably quite a big musical trait, isn't it?
Sure, yeah, the pantomime dames, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the taller and more stout you were, the funnier the dame you were. In fact, in going through the history of Babes in Toyland, it wasn't Babes in Toyland, but there was a play called Babes in the Wood, and the storyline of that was appropriated for Babes in Toyland. But there was a famous pantomime dame who was about 6'3" and 280 pounds, who played a female character. And and in Christmas pantomimes, of course, in England, usually the female characters are played by men. So, yeah, that's a long-standing theatrical tradition.
Yeah, definitely. And Jean Harlow, of course,
Yes,
pops up right at the end.
This, I believe, is her last Hal Roach film.
Yeah.
She's in 3 with Laurel and Hardy, and she's in at least 1 with Charlie Chase. I think it's called What Women Did for Me. And Roach had a story about that. Also, originally in the script, she was supposed to be Kennedy's daughter.
Right, okay.
But I think they specify that it's his wife. I'm not sure, but anyway, we always assume that it's his wife. She calls him.
Does she refer to darling?
She calls him darling, which you probably a daughter wouldn't do for daddy. Daddy, she would have said.
We won't go into that.
Yeah, let's hope not. Yeah, the press sheet. Evidently, it was still in the press sheet. The press sheet indicated that her role was originally envisioned as Kennedy's, quote, fair young daughter, unquote. The press sheet also describes Laurel and Hardy as, quote, the latest and most willingly inefficient additions to the sheriff's staff of property attachers. And so the story about her is that just after she finished this film, she went into Mr. Roach's office, along with her mother, of course, who ran her life, and her stepfather, and she asked to be released from her contract. And I remember seeing her contract at USC, and it was signed as Harleen McGrew, which evidently was her married name. Her husband's name was Chuck McGrew II, and he was just sort of a wealthy playboy. And anyway, Roach said, she said her husband disliked the motion picture business. She said, it's breaking up my marriage. What can I do? So I told her I'd tear up her contract, which I did. And actually, her marriage to Chuck McGrew II was already on the rocks, and it didn't really matter whether he liked the movie business or not, because Jean's mother wanted to get her into a better contract with a bigger studio than the Hal Roach Studios. And now that she had a few credits to show to casting directors, it was going to be a little bit easier. And before long, she was starring in the multi-million-dollar aviation epic Hell's Angels, which was financed and directed by Howard Hughes. And that's what really put her on the map. So there you are.
And that's interesting, because her actual the story she gave to, was it Screenland magazine? I forget now. I spoke about it on the last episode. She said the reason for it was that her grandparents, who were closest to her than her parents, went to Kansas City to the cinema and just happened to go into the cinema and what was it called? The last.
They saw Double Whoopee.
Double Whoop, thank you.
Grandpa saw Double Whoopee and was not happy.
He was not happy at all. No, not happy at all. So he insisted that she come out of movie business immently. So that was the story.
She didn't exactly do that. She came out of the studio, but anyway, yes, she has a small. And also, it's interesting. It's a very windy day when she's shooting her scenes.
Yes.
Just as you can tell, it's a very windy day when in October of 27, when Laurel and Hardy are walking down the backlot street just before the banana peel business in Battle of the Century. There's a newsstand, and you see the magazines fluttering all over with the wind. Well,
that's right.
Well, that's October. Well, this is February of 29 when they're shooting Bacon Grabbers, and it's still a very gusty day in Cheviot Hills when they did that final scene with Jean Harlow.
Yes.
So
yeah, that's it. And then it's a nice wrap up as well. I know you're saying that originally it was scripted to be different, but I think it's good. It works really well at the end, doesn't it?
Well, you know, Stan said he always wanted an unhappy ending for Laurel and Hardy because he said it gave them more integrity. And I mean, it's ridiculous that a guy running a steamroller would run over a car. So logically, it makes no sense. Nor would he run over a radio, really. But I like the turnabout is fair play, you know, where Laurel and Hardy
Yeah.
finally get the radio. At last we've got it, and we can return it to whoever has rented it to Mr. Kennedy. But here comes the steamroller, and now it's just nothing but a pile of wooden splinters and tubes. And Kennedy is just, there's your radio. Or then yes, Jean Harlow comes in. She says, "I just paid for it." So yes, so that's turnabout is fair play number one. Is Kennedy's laughing because the radio's been destroyed, but now he realizes that he's just paid for this useless pile of rubble. Okay,
Yes.
Now Laurel and Hardy are laughing, but then turnabout yet again is the steamroller goes all over their cars. So they
That's
both
it.
wind up
That's
with useless machinery at the end of the film.
'Twas ever thus.
So I like that, and I'm really hoping that Serge Bromberg and Eric Lang and the people at Lobster Films will be able to find material that is as pristine for Bacon Grabbers as what they found for the 1927 films, because I looked at both of the DVDs, and if I had a working Super 8 projector right now, I would be looking at the print that I got of it. I think I have two prints of it, actually, from Blackhawk, because I know I bought it when it was only available as a silent, and then in the mid to late 70s, they found the soundtrack discs and issued it again, this time with the music. And so I think I've got two prints of it. And I seem to recall it looking a lot better than it does on any of the DVDs. If you look at there's a featurette that Serge Bromberg did for the new Year One Blu-ray about the restoration of the films. And he shows Pudding Pants on Philip from a print that was made in the late 50s for Robert Youngson, and then a print that Blackhawk made only 5 years later from the same source. And you get to see how much more deterioration has happened just naturally, just the film just decaying, and it's quite sobering. So
it is, yeah, it's frightening.
So
yeah.
I hope that somewhere in an archive, somewhere in the world, there is pristine material on Bacon Grabbers. I remember for years and years there didn't seem to be any stills that survived for it, and I certainly hope that you have a lot of them for your book.
We have all of them. We've got all of them.
Well, I was at USC in 1980 and going through this big file box of miscellaneous Hal Roach stuff, and they had, I think it was only 10 stills, but they had 3 prints of each one of them, and including the one with the beards and the one with Charlie Hall's Cream of Wheat. Yes. And I went, aha, deleted scenes, and these stills are not in the big 1975 McCabe Kilgore band book. There's just one little frame blow up. That's all they had, because they couldn't find the stills on that film. So at least we had those. And I didn't get a print made. I wish I had, of the still of Charlie Hall with the standing in the cab of the steamroller.
Charlie Rogers.
Yes, Charlie Rogers. Yes, I only have a photocopy of that. I don't have an actual print. But
well, we can improve on that for you.
Good.
Don't you worry. We'll get it to you.
Oh, great. Well, I'll be on the lookout for that.
That's no problem. No, there's a really lovely still in there, which I love. I think it's a candid shot, and you've got Edgar Kennedy standing in the doorway, and Stan and Babe are sort of leaning against the door frame, and they look like they're having a bit of a laugh between takes. It's a lovely little shot.
Well, good for Stax that he filmed shot those as well. Well, you're whetting my appetite for the book. Do you want to talk a little bit about the score, the music score for it?
Yes, I would love to, because what I also like to do, I don't know if you've listened to any that we've done in the past, when you mentioned the actual titles of the scores, I'll go and lift that bit of the score and play it after you've spoken. So in the episodes, it's really nice. It's a lovely way of doing it.
Well, this morning I went through the list of music cues that I know, and as I say, it appears that a significant amount of it was either ad-libbed or composed by the organist, and the man playing the organ was named Norbert Ludwig, as in Ludwig drums that Ringo Starr plays, and he was playing the pipe organ at the Camden Trinity Baptist Church, which had been bought by the Victor Talking Machine Company, and this was on Tuesday, August 6, 1929, from 7 p.m. to 11:15 p.m. at night. This was a long day for old Norbert, because he had earlier done an Our Gang film in the morning. Let's see. He'd done Saturday's lesson from 9 to 12:15. He did reel 1, and from 1:15 to 4:30, he did reel 2 of our gang's Saturday's lesson. And then Bacon Grabbers was all recorded from 7 to 11:15. So that was a long day for poor Norbert. And let's see, he was from born in Lusk, Russia, on December 28th, 1902. He grew up in Austria. He studied at the Vienna Conservatory before coming to the United States. He studied at Juilliard, so he was a very well-trained musician. He became a naturalized United States citizen in June 1922, worked as an organist in New York at the Rivoli, Roxy, and Paramount Theaters. And let's see, he wrote several tunes. There was one called Blue Scarecrow, which got into the television era as the theme of a show called The World of Mr. Sweeney. And when he did the scores for Bacon Grabbers and also for Angora Love, he played the Estey, E-S-T-E-Y, that's the manufacturer who made the pipe organ. And this, again, was at the Trinity Baptist Church in Camden, New Jersey, which was now a Victor Studio. And this is also the same location and the same instrument on which the great jazz performer Fats Waller made his pipe organ solo recordings in 1926 through 1929. Those of us who love old jazz records are well familiar with those, and it's the same organ that is being played for those. It's interesting. He probably had some difficulty keeping his performance synchronized with the film because the pipes were in a separate room from the organ console. And so there was an inherent delay between the time that he pressed a key and the time that the pipe responded with sound. So that could have been a little bit difficult when you're trying to precisely coordinate your music with the action. There was another man by the name of William H. Reitz, R-E-I-T-Z, providing the percussion, and somebody else named J. Wolf. I don't know the full name, but just J. Wolf. And he had the sound effects. He was doing the barking of Kennedy's dog. I don't know if he was actually barking or if he had some other device making the sound effect. And he also had the rubber razor, the raspberry toy that did the snoring for the Laurel and Hardy when they're sleeping at the beginning of the film. And because talkies kind of eliminated the need for theater organists, Norbert Ludwig became an accordionist in hotels, and he also taught music and lived until October 29th of 1960, leaving his wife Ethel and his daughter Ina. So there we go. And of course, as they often did when they did these scores, they use a lot of popular tunes. So let me go through it and just briefly tell you what is where. The opening titles are a tune called Your Way Is My Way, Any Way You Go. In the sheriff's office, it's Canadian Capers. When they're trying to get out of the office, it's Where Do We Go From Here, which is an old World War I song. Okay, the next one is, when they're at the front door, it's called Do I Know What I'm Doing? when they get into their car, it's a song called Henry's Made a Lady Out of Lizzie. There were several records of that song, and it refers to the fact that the Tin Lizzie, which is what they called the Model T, I don't really know why, but that was the nickname for the Model T, was the Tin Lizzie. And in late 1927, Henry Ford stopped production on them because they were too reliable. They were too dependable. Nobody ever bought a new one. They never wore out. And he'd been making them since 1909, and everybody who needed a Model T had one. And so he said, well, I have to think about planned obsolescence. And that is, if the car doesn't wear out, then we'll just make it not stylish anymore. So he created the Model A. And the Model A was a much sleeker and more stylish car and came in a variety of colors, unlike the Model T, where they always said you can get a Model T in any color you want as long as it's black. So now there were several different models of Model A's, and they were very sporty. And it meant that the whole Detroit Ford plant had to be retooled. So that area of Detroit actually went through a depression before the Great Depression kicked in, because the Ford company was out of commission for a while, retooling itself to make this new car. So Henry's Made a Lady Out of Lizzie refers to the beautiful, sleek new Model A supplanting the old, bulky Model T. And then once again, where do we go from here? When they're saying which way to the house, when you first see Edgar Kennedy mowing his lawn, it's a song called "Here's That Party Now in Person." When they're approaching Kennedy while he's mowing his lawn, there's a tune called "Bluegrass." When you first see Buddy Moore with the big dog, it's a tune called "The Whistler and His Dog." When the first time that Ollie is saying the paper, it's a tune called "I Owe You." When they're at the window, at the upstairs window, it's "My Window of Dreams." When Kennedy has the mop and he's trying to push Stan off of the top of the ladder, "It All Depends on You." Then they go back to "My Window of Dreams." Then when Kennedy has the shotgun and he's aiming at Stan back and forth, it's "Shoo Fly, Don't Bother Me." the time that the fire hydrant is hit and it spurts in front of Harry Bernard, it's Pomp and Circumstance, which we always hear at high school graduation ceremonies here in the States.
Right.
Then when Laurel and Hardy have brought the radio out into the road, and Kennedy is angry and he kicks Ollie in the rear end, it's a tune called Revenge. And then there's a little bit more of I Owe You when Jean Harlow comes up and says, "Darling, I paid for the radio." And the final ending track, once again, is Henry's Made a Lady Out of Lizzie. Now, interspersed between that is that little tune that goes dum 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 bum 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 bum. You hear that all through the film, and I think that's just a little interstitial theme that was created by Norbert Ludwig, because there's no mention of it in the official cue sheet. So that's what I can tell you about that score. It was of course it was issued on discs, and the real one is matrix number MVE 55757 and reel 2 is MVE 55758. And I hope there are still original discs for that somewhere. Mike Jones told me that he's got one of his members who's got a pristine set of discs for Angora Love. And of course, Serge Bromberg and Eric Lang are planning to do 1928 and 1929. So God willing, we'll all still be here in a couple of years, and hope we can get proper recording on that, because what we have is rather scratchy. So it would be nice to have a lovely, clean sounding transfer of that.
Absolutely. Is there a DVD available that has the original?
Yes.
Track.
Yeah. The Image one that Michael Agee did, the Lost Films of Laurel and Hardy series, has that, and the Black Hawk Prince in the late 70s had the original score. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
But
so I don't think it's on the Universal set.
No, I think they've got either Beau Hunks or something else on it. Yeah.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
It is available. It's out there.
That's good.
And
brilliant.
Yeah, well, final notes I can tell you is that the film cost $39,387.84 to produce. Where I found that, I have no idea. and recording the score all by itself cost $4,043.06. Wow. Why there's 6 cents there, I don't know. But anyway, the other thing is that it was filmed at the last 2 weeks of February. It was scored on Tuesday, August 6th of 1929, and it was released on October 19th, which I think is a month after the last MGM silent feature was released, which is a Greta Garbo movie. So there were quite a few Roach silent shorts that were released after the last MGM silent feature. And as I say, I think Angora Love, which came out in December of 1929, I think that's the last silent released by any major studio in America. There were some very low budget Western studios that made Westerns for rural theaters that couldn't afford to convert to the new sound equipment, so they were still running silent films. There's actually a movie about that called "It Happened in Hollywood," and it's about an old washed-up movie cowboy who was great in silence but couldn't make the transition to talkies. Well, there's this rural community, and there's this boy, a sick boy in a hospital in this little rural community, and his community has only been able to show silent movies. So he's still a big star where these kids are. And the kid sends him a letter. He's saying, "Gee, I'd sure love to meet you in person." And the washed-up movie cowboy, he can't get any of the big stars to come with him, but he gets all of their doubles. And it looks as though they're the actual doubles, because they do resemble these people. There's W.C. Fields and Mae West and all these other people dressed as those stars, and they all come to visit the boy in the hospital. But it's because his old silents are still playing in this rural community. So yeah, you can imagine it probably did. It didn't just all happen overnight. Suddenly installing amplifiers and speakers and all these things which you hadn't needed before, and of course it caused a great upheaval with all the musicians who formerly had been working in silent pictures. So as Chauncey Haynes, who was a theater organist, said, we had suicides galore. And so it's a sad unfortunate circumstance thanks to new technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know in the past we've spoken about how certainly Bacon Grabbers and Angora Love may have been received by audiences, given the fact that they were pretty much museum pieces by the time they were released.
Yeah.
And I haven't been able to find hardly any reviews of Bacon Grabbers or Angora Love for that matter so far. I found one review for Bacon Grabbers, but that is dated 1930. That's the only one I could find. And interestingly, it's from the Exhibitors Herald World, from Bedford Theatre in Bedford, PA. And it says, Bacon Grabbers, this is one of Laurel and Hardy's synchronised comedies, and while good, it has organ accompaniment, which is not so good after running them in talking pictures.
Yeah, by the time that Bacon Grabbers came out, 5 of their talkies had already been released.
Yes.
Because MGM was rush releasing those into the theaters because they didn't know if sound was going to last. They thought maybe this is just a flash in the pan, like 3D was. 3D didn't last. So who knew if people were going to say, okay, this was a nice novelty, but now let's get back to silent pictures. And it's too bad they couldn't have coexisted, because really silent films are a whole different art form from talking pictures. It's too bad that they couldn't coexist. It's also too bad that radio drama couldn't have coexisted with television in America the way that it has in England. I know they still have radio drama in England, and that too is a unique art form. It's not just an inferior form of television. It has its own properties, its own artistic properties.
Yeah.
So
yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, that's right. Brilliant.
All right.
Thank you for that, Randy. That's another excellent look, another deep dive into one of the boys' films. Only one silent picture to go, and then we hit the talkies. So that's exciting stuff. That's brilliant, Randy. If you can hang around, we're going to do a little Q&A for the patrons of the podcast very shortly, if that's okay with yourself.
All right.
But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us again today. It's been brilliant to learn about the behind the scenes of Bacon Grabbers and all that goes with it. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
And so the curtain comes down on another episode. I do hope you've enjoyed our chat about Bacon Grabbers today. I know I certainly did. And don't forget, if you'd still like to hear more with me and Randy, then there's a further 30 minutes or so just waiting for you on patreon.com, as well as a host of other exclusive episodes, all with very special guests such as Steve Masser, Glenn Mitchell, Richard Bann, and many more. And one more thing, Russell and I will be attending the Talking Pictures TV Festival in Christchurch on the 14th and 15th of October 2023. That's Christchurch in the UK, I should add. So if you're thinking of attending the event over the weekend, please do come and say hello. We'd love to see you there. So all that remains to say is thank you again to our brilliant guest, the ever-fascinating Randy Skretvedt. Thank you to the Beau Hunks Orchestra and Basta Music. And as always, a huge thank you to you for spending this time with me once again. And so until next time, it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
And a very goodbye from me. Goodbye.